Okay, in Module 8, we're going to touch on adolescent morality, though we don't see a ton of development compared to childhood, where there was so much more going on. And then we're going to discuss Kenneth Dodge's social information processing model. So let's go get into that a little bit more so. So with adolescence, what we see is a shift to conventional reasoning from the pre-conventional reasoning level that we talked about regarding Kohlberg. And a lot of teens begin to view morality as a really important part of their identity in regards to the morals and values that they hold. And that's what you want to have. You want to have them embed that they're a fine and upstanding person as part of their own code, because that's going to lead them to behave in a more moral manner, thus fitting into society more easily. On the other hand, there are some that adopt a more antisocial type of behavior. And Kohlberg would say that these adolescents are stuck more in that pre-conventional level and displaying more egocentric, kind of like what's in it for me. And if I don't get caught, it's fine to do unless I get punished from the outside. And so Kenneth Dodge worked with a lot of individuals that had these kind of antisocial leanings. And they discovered one of the big problems is that they have a biased or deficient interpretation of events, and this starts very early on in the process. So he says there's 6 steps that we all take in when we are trying to figure out how to proceed with new information and how to react to it. The first is the encoding. So we take in the information. Then we interpret that information. We're making sense and deciding what caused the other person's behavior. Then we clarify our goals. We decide, what we want to achieve in a situation. Then we do a response search, meaning we think of all the possible actions to achieve our goal. And then we make kind of a pros and cons of each of those possibilities. And then we finally act. Okay. So here's the situation. So, crowded hallway, assuming we're in school, and somebody brushes up against you, causing you to drop your books. Okay. Now, if you've ever been in those high school hallways, they're pretty chaotic and that people joke around and bump into others, and it's kind of just the ordinary stuff. So you encode it. Somebody's bumped into me. I have dropped. The interpretation could be the person means to do it, or it was just an accident. And that interpretation is all the difference. So those who are more antisocial tend to have the automatic negative kind of interpretation. In other words, the individual meant to do it. It was towards me. There was no accident. But you can see based on that interpretation, it's going to send you down very different roads as far as what your goals are. If they meant to do it, it's getting back at them. If it was an accident, I need to just go pick up the books. Right? And then you think of all the other things and options that are out there, and then you go ahead and respond. Another thing that's important to note that individuals that have this kind of bias, these really high aggressive ones, not only do they have a bias in the way they interpret the event, but they also misconstrue the reaction of those around them when they do follow through with a more aggressive stance, thinking that a lot more people will believe what they did is correct and that they will actually be looked at favorably, when the exact opposite is true. And so what Dr. Dodge tries to do is to have them really stop and do a more accurate interpretation so that you see fewer aggressive acts. Now, we can see that the violent crime among males and females tends to really peak when we talk about in the teenage years and early emerging adulthood. And then it really diminishes after that. And much more so for males, as you can see, by a huge margin compared to females. So here is Dodge's social information processing model and some examples of what this would look like, especially for aggressive youth. So I wanted to include this here because I do feel like it's helpful for you to have a sense of kind of how that goes, and also the explanation I just gave. Here's how antisocial behavior tends to develop, usually starting with poor parental discipline and monitoring. and that resulting in child conduct problems in early childhood. When you have conduct problems, you get to be rejected by your normal peers, and you may have some academic failure because school is a social phenomenon. It's not just learning the content. So the only people that are going to associate with you are more deviant peer group. In other words, others that are having similar issues that you are, which can lead rise to delinquency. And so that's not an area that we want to be heading towards. So those that have antisocial behavior, you tend to have more lack of the emotional control. And so as we were talking about earlier, some of the early moral lessons, one of them is to be able to inhibit your impulses, any of the emotions that you may be displaying. And in adolescence with aggression and misbehavior like conduct problems, that tends to be missing. You also have families that have this coercive family environment where family members are really locked in a power struggle. And each one is trying to control the others through various coercive tactics like threatening, yelling, hitting, and that this just contributes more to the kind of appropriation and mislabeling of events. And so the good news is not necessarily all children who are antisocial grow up to be antisocial adults, but it certainly puts them at a higher risk. And this is just a graph to really kind of go in and show this, starting out with biological predisposition towards these things, and then, of course, having the culture environment surrounding you also contributing to eventual conduct disorder. Okay, so that's Module 8. Module 9, we're going to look at adult morality a bit, and then all together this moral development in perspective to kind of put a nice wrap up to this chapter. So stay tuned for our last module.